Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. Do you know what Sponcon is? It's pervasive, it's powerful, and it's influencing your food purchasing decisions. So we're going to kick off episode 15 by defining this elusive term. Next, co-branding has crossed over from fashion to food with some bizarre consequences. We will talk Carhartt-brand beer and Tabasco-sauce-flavored Jelly Bellies. And finally, why is brewpub food so awful? It's one of life's great mysteries. Fortunately, I have some of the finest minds in beer here in the studios of OPB today to help me answer that last question. Jeff Alworth is the author of classics such as The Beer Bible and Cider Made Simple. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. And Lucy Burningham is a certified Cicerone whose latest book is My Beer Year. Hey, Lucy.
Hey, Catherine. How are you?
Very good. And joining us for the first time today is Andy Kryza, the senior editor at Thrillist, who writes frequently about, you guessed it, beer. Welcome, Andy.
Great to be here.
And now for our first course. Sadly, the term Sponcon does not refer to criminals who lay eggs. No, Sponcon is short for sponsored content, and it's an increasingly important part of native advertising, or advertorial for the digital age. Jeff Alworth, you are an active blogger and podcaster. Can you explain to us what Sponcon is exactly?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a kind of a vague category that infects a lot of our media without us knowing about it. Maybe every couple of months I get an email from a marketing company that says, will you post a blog post for us under your own name that kind of just talks about how great our product is, and we'll pay you a lot of money. This is one version of sponsored content, and if I were to just put my own name on that, they would pay me some money, and no one would be the wiser, because normally when you go into my blog, I'm talking about beer or those kinds of things anyway. So it's the way of placing content that is actually an advertisement in a place that you don't expect advertisements, that kind of conceals its identity. And you kind of ride on the authenticity and voice of the person who you trust. So this happens in social media. It happens on blogs. Large groups like the New York Times have dabbled with it and gotten in trouble. So you kind of find it's ever since the media environment has changed and it's much harder to raise ad dollars. And with social media, so much stuff flows through social media. All these things have changed the way advertising works, and it's much harder for advertisers to get their products in front of people. So they're going to the people who are already have like a good audience. And so that's kind of the media environment we're in right now.
So let's clarify, when this comes up and these people approach you to write about their products, you would put a hashtag sponsored or advertisement or something like that on the blog post, or do they not want you to do that?
I have never responded to them, but my understanding is that they would not want me to do that. They would prefer that I did not do that.
It's a secret.
Yeah.
They want you to have a secret.
Yeah. So let's say Budweiser comes and says, write this great article about this new product we're releasing, and we'll give you the copy and we'll pay you some money, and you can just post that on your blog. And people would think that I wrote that, except for my readers. We were talking earlier about reader numbers. I have so few readers; they know me pretty well. They would know instantly that was not my copy. But
they'd call you right out on it.
Yeah, they would. They'd be all over me.
These blurry lines really make me think that the consumer has to be so on it, right? You have to. Even when I'm looking at my Instagram feed, I'll see a cool picture and have to sort of search and sponsored. And that's when my little flag goes up. Okay, this isn't really in my feed. I didn't choose this. I just feel like we all have to be so much more aware of who's creating the content, why, where's it coming from. It's a lot more work to be on the internet these days.
Yeah.
That's true. But it's also something that's not exclusive to the internet. As the lines blur between print and digital, you'll see a newspaper that has at the top of it sponsored content. And that's where it gets a little more dubious to me, because it's part of the masthead, right? So you see the New York Times, and then underneath really small where the author's name or, something else about contact information would come into play. It says sponsored content. This is an ad. And it happens on Twitter. They have to put a little hashtag that says ad. There are legal ramifications for it. when you get caught duping people. But there's a way to do it that becomes a little more brand agnostic as well.
And Andy, you mentioned that there are legal implications. I believe the FTC will come after a blogger or a digital personality if, I think the quote I read was, it has to be clear and conspicuous that what they're saying has been sponsored or what they're writing about has been sponsored.
It puts a lot of onus on the reader to try and figure out where they're being guided. And that's where I think that brand agnostic sponsored content tends to be a little more successful. By that I mean, if you're looking at a website that has, for example, we had Miller Coors sponsoring a lot of our beer content, but we would never in a million years write about Miller Coors beers in that content. We're talking about, the life of the beer drinker, craft breweries that don't have any association whatsoever. That was part of the reason that we did it, was we were given that independence rather than promising stories that are like, go drink this by a lakeside and listen to Sam Elliott.
So wait, Andy, so on Thrillist, if someone were to go to Thrillist, there would be content and at the top it would say sponsored by Miller or something.
If it is, yeah, and it'll be relatively pervasive throughout. So you're not given too much of an illusion about the fact that we're receiving advertising dollars for it. It's just at the top, Miller Coors presents this, but we're really never talking. We're not a trash talking website to begin with, but were we to start talking trash about that, we would remove that from it, from the content itself, so that it's just completely bare of it. We are pretty savvy about not angering people, but also not feeding people a line that they're being fed content that is paid for.
Right. And so, okay, the other form of sponsored content that can be a little more insidious, I think, and I wonder if you all have seen this, and we mentioned it previously, is on social media, Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. What do you all think of, someone you respect who knows a lot about food and beverage is writing about something, and they'll put like 25 or 30 hashtags, and you just start zoning out, and then one of the hashtags in there, just tiny little hashtag, is ad. Have you all seen that before?
Yeah, I've seen that before, and I think it's a way of hiding what's really going on. I think one of the FTC requirements was that you have hashtag ad right at the front of your post, because a lot of people were doing that, and that's a way of, giving the advertiser a little bit of extra oomph, a little prominence where, it's a little deceptive.
Yeah. Jeff, I'm so intrigued that you've been approached so many times. What's your secret?
Well, I think there's not so many people writing about beer, so probably just a small population. But, if you have a good voice, either on a blog or in social media, where you have people who really trust what you say, value what you say, if you've built up an audience, even if it's a relatively small audience, if it's well targeted, people are going to be wanting to access that group. And if they can get you to talk about a product, your readers are going to be so much more interested in hearing what you have to say, because they already have this relationship with you, than seeing an ad, next to the blog post. So there's a real incentive to have people who already have a following on social media or elsewhere say nice things about advertisers, which has always been the case. When I first started writing about beer, long before internet was a big deal, breweries were much more excited to be in the local newspaper, a place like that, than place an ad. It was much more valuable to have a writer talk about it than an advertiser. So what Andy said earlier, I think, is right. This is not actually all that new. It's just there's always been this tension between content and advertising, and we're just seeing it playing out.
Jeff, I think this makes you an influencer.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, but I think people are unaware of how small my influence really is in reality. But
well, what concerns me
and
a little bit,
I shouldn't be saying that right now. You're right. I have enormous influence.
Yeah, I think you're selling yourself just a little bit short as a longtime fan, in fact. So it's a pleasure to hear you be so humble. And I also think that you're kind of selling short the fact that a lot of people do write about beer. A lot of people don't write about it well.
Oh, well.
That's true.
Well, thank you.
True.
I
just had to throw that in before I get my autograph later.
Yeah, all right.
So I'm concerned, you guys, that there are these influencers who don't even really understand what these lines mean and what they are. They just are getting content and maybe getting money to put Instagram posts up or whatever they choose to do, and not even knowing that they're part of, an advertising campaign. I don't know. Do you guys see that people are unaware?
I don't know if they're unaware, but I do know that, especially on social media, it's possible if you have a large following on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook that you can command a lot of money for posting what are essentially advertisements, what you mentioned earlier, and actually make a living. So young people are putting themselves through college by their Instagram feeds.
Very few young people.
Very few young people. But it's remarkable to me that it's even possible for anybody to do that. It's
true.
A new media world.
I think also it gets very fuzzy with freebies. I'm sure you all have been sent freebies. But as critics, we're sent samples, right, in order to assess something, just like a movie critic would be sent to a media screening or a book critic would get an advance copy of a book. You know, I might get some wine samples to taste and assess. Three of you might get some beer samples to taste and assess. In fact, we might be doing that today, tasting some beer samples. And that's all in your line of work, but then where does it cross over into, fuzzy territory? I actually was asking Ivy Manning, who's a food writer who's often on this show, about this, and she was telling me this story about a food and farms tour she went on, and all these bloggers showed up in these fancy $200 to $300 shoes with like these fancy blue soles, and she was just laughing because they're knee deep in mud, and she's wearing her Wellingtons, and all these bloggers are wearing these beautiful ballet flats and taking pictures of themselves. So they're not being paid, but where do you cross the line? What do you guys think?
I think that pervades a lot of our current media landscape, and in many ways makes readers and viewers extremely suspicious of what you're up to. You know, I as a relatively new dad, I constantly look at, how do I change a diaper when a kid has a rash? And then, you look at a YouTube video and the thing pops up and it says, sponsored by Pampers. in the side corner, it just pops up in your face. So you're constantly being bombarded by ads. And that has made readers and viewers extremely suspicious. So if you're dealing with beer or you're dealing with food, you look at the comment section on something like that and it's immediately, how much should you get paid to shill for this thing that I don't like because of a matter of personal taste? And that really, really screws with your credibility because other people are taking more advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's good to have a really solid policy here. I don't know that there's a right or wrong policy on how you do this, but it's good to have a clear policy and follow that. And so for me, there's something like 5,000 breweries in the country, and they all make 10 or 20 beers. So it's impossible for me to taste all the beer in the world. So my policy is if you send me a sample of your beer, I guarantee that I will taste it. So it puts you in the front of my tasting line. It doesn't mean I'll ever write about it or certainly not write positively about it. But I will taste it, and that's actually a big value for in a situation where you have so many breweries. They can't even necessarily be assured that people are tasting their beer. So sending samples is one way for them to do that. So to me, that seems like that's a trade-off I can live with, and I let my readers know that, and they can make a judgment about whether I'm compromised. And I think each writer or each organ has to decide what their standards are.
Right. And I, appreciate getting samples, especially from breweries that I can't buy their beer here in Oregon. Mm-hmm. It helps me get a sense of the landscape of different trends and what brewers are doing. But yeah, I think it's what you do with that information. If I am going to take a sample, write an article about how this is my favorite beer in the world, and I just happened to get it for free. That's different than me just tasting it and using that information in kind of a broader context. So yeah, the policy matters.
Yeah. So how about you, Catherine? So when we're talking about beer that's maybe at maximum $10 or $15 a bottle for the most expensive beer, but you write about things which have a much. It seems like you might be more susceptible to rare vintages and expensive wines.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. It's interesting. The wineries that tend to send out samples are the ones whose wine I don't really like. I really love the wines that come from small producers and small importers who don't have a PR budget. So I usually end up buying all the wine I end up writing about. Or if it is a sample, I don't typically write about expensive wines, so I haven't had that problem. But yeah, there's anyone who's a journalist cannot afford to buy a $2,000 bottle of wine. So you have to just kind of be upfront and say, I was there at this event. I was able to taste this wine as part of a trade tasting, and that's just kind of how it's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up, if anyone's bored and tooling around the internet, it's really fun to go look up sponsored content fails. They're, Kardashian hangers-on and people like that who will post something on Instagram that will include the verbiage from the email sent by the marketing person. Like, just cut this and paste it, and then paste it into the Instagram. Here's what you should say, : They put all that in there. And so it's pretty funny. Anyway.
It's always pleasant to hear idiots like Rob Disick, the Kardashian hanger-on, say : in a conversation about whatever he's trying to shill. Because they don't have enough money.
Oh, no, they need more.
Yes.
They need more.
Yeah.
I would say : for days for that kind of money.
Yeah, really. Let's shift to our next segment, which has been brought to you by our previous segment. It is another crass subject matter called co-branding. New Balance makes shoes for J. Crew. Stella McCartney designs workout wear for Adidas. But things get really weird in the food and drink category with two brands teaming up, or one brand doing something that they don't normally do. Like, what is Patagonia food? What is Wheaties beer? Andy Kryza, I'll bet you have a strong opinion about Ben & Jerry's cookie dough beer brewed by New Belgium. What is the deal with co-branded beverages and foods?
I actually probably have a fairly controversial opinion on this, which is that when you put a brand that's not typically associated with a beer, for example, New Belgium made co-branded beer with Ben & Jerry's for the past 2 years. I think the first one was Brownie Bites, and this one is chocolate chip cookie dough pale, if I'm not mistaken. To me, things like that are when you have a sports team like the Blazers that have Whitmer Brothers making a beer specifically for the stadium, that turns people on to beer that would not normally be drinking good beer. New Belgium's a great brewery. The fact that they're able to pull ice cream fans in to try something that's not fizzy yellow and gross. Granted, that might be fizzy yellow and gross. I've never actually had it. But the fact that they're able to pull people in to try something that they possibly might get turned on to something better is a win for me. If you look at Brewery Omegon out of New York, they make a Game of Thrones branded beer in collaboration with HBO. Those people are usually probably drinking wine or blood. I'm not quite sure what Game of Thrones fans are typically getting down on Sunday night. But they're not people that are drinking Saisons or farmhouse beers or other things that might not be in their purview. But if they see the Queen of Dragons on a bottle, they're going to buy a quad. And that's fantastically cool to me. It doesn't always work, as with, the pink bottle of Rogue Voodoo Donuts nightmare.
Wait, tell me more about this. Have you tasted the Voodoo Donuts Rogue beer?
I have. Has everyone else?
Yeah. Yes.
You kind of have to. It's
Yes.
a tourist rite of passage here in Oregon. Voodoo Donuts being the third largest tourist attraction in the city behind the zoo in Multnomah Falls.
Wow, I did not know that.
I probably just made that up, but it might be.
It sounds right.
Might be
It
pretty
sounds right.
It tastes like somebody dumped a beer through a pancake and then shot it with beef fat.
Ew.
It's absolutely disgusting, but you see it at every kiosk in the airport. You see it at Fred Meyer. It's this thing that gets people to say, well, what the hell is that? They taste it, it's gross, but they didn't drink a Coors Light as a result of it, and that's kind of a win for me. Same thing at a stadium. You're going to go see the Timbers. You're going to drink a Whitmer beer, branded beer that's got the Timbers axe on it rather than resorting to a giant can of something crappy. That's maybe a gateway beer for somebody that all of a sudden says, holy crap, light bulb. I can do better for this.
Yeah.
I'm actually a fan of branded beers in the same way that I'm a fan of kooky wine labels. They say that a majority of wine bottles to people that aren't really wine people are sold by the label. It's the same reason that you'll buy Flying Dog out of Maryland that has Ralph Steadman, Hunter S. Thompson's artist, doing all of their labels. People buy that as a collector's item, but suddenly they're turned on to a better beer. Like I don't see a loss in that.
This sounds like damning with faint praise to me.
It is.
Jeff, what do you think? Have you tasted any co-branded beers that you thought were any good, or?
Yeah, there was actually a really cool project. So I kind of agree with Andy in one way. I think it in a way it relates to our earlier topic where you've got as the media market fragments, you have smaller and smaller audiences that are more focused, more and more focused. So you try to co-branding brings these two audiences together. So you have Rogue and a beer company and a donut company, and it kind of increases both of their audiences. So I get the logic behind it, and but I also think it doesn't work very often. I'm not sure that the gateway beer phenomenon is necessarily – I'm not sure that theory pans out. I'm not sure if you drink a Game of Thrones beer that ever makes you go back for a non-Game of Thrones beer. However, that said, I do think there are some cool projects out there, and there was one by a local brewery in town called Hopworks Urban Brewery here in Portland, and they worked with Patagonia to make a beer out of this very cool type of grain that has been developed to fight not fight global to thrive in global warming where you have less water, and so Patagonia has an interest in global warming and the environment, and Hopworks is a organic brewery, so they came together and worked on this thing, and Hopworks had to figure out how to brew with this weird grain, which doesn't actually work that well in beer, and it was a tasty beer. It was actually quite nice. So there you kind of had co-branding, but also the elevation of this third thing. And I thought that was a successful effort.
Yeah. And, I think where this can work is where companies with similar values come together, just to sort of add to the kumbaya fuzzy feelings of this. So Patagonia and Hopworks, they definitely share sort of this, eco-friendly sustainability vision. So it's a way to raise awareness of those things. And I think that also is what happened with Ben & Jerry's in New Belgium, right? They're both B Corps, and they both were – I think they made this beer to help raise awareness about climate change for a nonprofit. So, hey, right, why not? They're trying to do good things and reach a broader audience. Where I just kind of lose interest is something like the Lululemon beer. Lululemon is a yoga pants company. Yes, I've tried this beer. They collaborated with a brewery in Canada called Stanley Park Brewing. And I felt like their messaging was weird, and why were they doing this? These things can go wrong.
It's probably more slimming than the Carhartt beer, though.
That's probably true.
Was that the beer that had, it was called like a beer for ladies, like kind of insulting every single woman who's ever enjoyed a beer?
I think there were two versions.
Oh, that was
maybe
Pink
in the
Lady.
Second one. Oh, okay, maybe you're talking about a different one. But yeah, I feel like there's kind of some weird language and why. Yeah,
Lululemon has done a lot to insult ladies, but they still spend all their money there. But that's another story for another show. I like where you're going with the like-minded companies, Lucy, that have high aspirations to make the world a better place. But come on, what do you guys think about Ruffles Buffalo Wild Wings Hot Wings Potato Chips or Kellogg's Jif Peanut Butter Cereal? I mean, these people are just doing this to make money, aren't they? I mean, A&W Root Beer Float Frosting. Dial Froyo brand frozen yogurt cooling body wash.
No, really?
Are they just designing that
This
to
is a
get
new one
people
for me.
attacked by raccoons
I think so.
on their way home?
Yeah.
Humans, they're delicious.
Smear all that on and who knows?
Wow. There are no limits is what this is making me think. Where will they stop?
Yeah, I remember as a kid, Lip Smackers lip balms used to have like food flavored.
Dr. Pepper.
Oh, Dr. Pepper. That was my
that's
favorite
right.
one.
Yeah.
Yes. I was a fan.
So there is that way to use the popularity of two different things and bring them together, and that seems to make some sense. But it gets abstract and weird fairly quick, so I don't think they're all winners.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you feel that the collaborative spirit of breweries has gone too far in that regard then? Because you look at, breweries around the country will team up, they'll make a joint effort beer, but then you throw something like so let's say Frank's Red Hot makes a michelada with 10 barrel. Is that a stone too far?
Yeah, it is interesting.
Wait, what's a michelado?
A michelada is it's basically a Mexican Bloody Mary with beer instead of vodka.
Oh.
And it's delicious.
It's a great hangover cure.
I think what you just described was what they should do more of. And instead, what you see is averaging. So two breweries will get together and they have different kind of philosophies, different house character. And instead of figuring out a way to integrate the beers that, like you just described, they come up with this weird middle ground, which is an average between the two. So it doesn't satisfy anyone. And I see way too many of those collaborations. And I think you see that in some of these I had the New Belgian ice cream beer. It
This is the Ben and Jerry's beer?
Yeah, the Ben and
cookie
Jerry's.
dough.
It tasted a lot like liquid. It tasted like melted ice cream. And as a beer fan, not my favorite. So
As a melted ice cream fan, that's very enticing to me.
true.
Yeah, sometimes it seems like these collaborations it just seems wrong, you know? I mean, it's okay to put chocolate and peanut butter or peanut butter and chocolate. That works, but there are some things that maybe just don't go great together. And I don't see beer and ice cream going great together.
Oh, you've never had a beer float?
No.
Oh, that's
I've had a
good
root beer
summer
float.
treat.
Now we know what we're having for dessert.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we have to unpack that a little bit. Our own Fred Eckhart, I think, was the one who invented that.
He did? I
yeah.
didn't know this history.
So
Yeah.
this is
An
a
excellent
beer
dessert.
figure in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, the famous writer Fred Eckhart, who started writing about beer long before anybody else, like in the 70s, when there was basically wasn't beer to write about. I think he was the one who invented the beer float. So he put
Thank you, Fred.
Yeah, he put I think like maybe chocolate or vanilla ice cream in a stout or a porter or something like that. He was
Smart.
an innovative man in so many ways.
There's a wonderfully overlooked John Steinbeck book called Cannery Row, where it's a bunch of bums in Monterey, California, trying to do something nice for the doctor in town that always helps them. And his dream is to have a beer float, and he's always too embarrassed to order it because he thinks that people assume him an alcoholic. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the book, he gets a really crappy beer and gets a scoop of ice cream in it, takes one sip, and casts it aside.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
perhaps Eckhart figured out the solution.
Yeah, you have to have a chocolatey kind of beer with not too many hops works better with ice cream because you want it to bridge over to the sweetness of the ice cream. So if it's got bitterness and hops, it's not so good. Probably low carbonation is not a bad thing either. I don't know.
Sounds good.
Yep.
We've gone way too deeply into this whole beer float thing.
It's a
Good
trend.
tangent.
There we go. Well, let's go deeply into tasting some beer now. I think we have some beers from Widmer. Is that right, Andy? You brought them in.
Indeed, they were handed over to me at short notice. We've got the PDX Pilsner.
Talking
and-
about samples that you taste and
Do we need a hashtag for this
yeah,
moment?
Yes,
hashtag.
sponsored content.
Well,
Sponcon.
no, wait,
Just
we're
kidding,
not,
just kidding.
Just not sponsored. We're just tasting it.
And then we
tasting
have the Broodylicious, which, from my understanding, is actually a collaboration beer with a Los Angeles brewery with a recipe taken from Reverend Nat's hard cider.
Yeah, that is.
It's a Russian doll of a collaboration beer.
So let's open some of these up and pour them and see what you guys think. Well, so this is a Widmer Brothers Crowler, so it's a giant 32-ounce can, and they just have written Broodylicious on the side, so it's kind of like a little custom project. It's kind of fun.
PDX Pils was a beer that they brewed. Widmer brewed last year, and they entered it into a contest we have here called the Oregon Beer Awards, and it competed against other Oregon Pilsners and won the gold medal. So this is kind of a
It's impressive.
Yeah.
That's an impressive feat. Some good Pilsners in Oregon.
I haven't had this Pilsner in a while. It's actually a little bit hard to find. It's a really nice Pilsner, though. Of course, it
It's delicious.
won that nice contest.
And what did you all think of the Russian doll of a co-branded beer?
It smells like pineapple.
I'm not sure about that beer.
Any cider notes in there?
No, the recipe that he told me that they were basing it on was I believe a pineapple IPA.
Okay.
So
I see.
I do
The
sense that this is very
Okay.
juicy. Not so much in the way of the hazy IPAs that I know that you're a little averse to at this point. Yes,
I like the hazy IPAs.
Or was that?
I'm skeptical that the haziness has anything to do with why we like them. It's my kind of my contention.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a popular style evolution. IPAs that look like a milkshake or an Orange Julius. These are very popular among certain precincts of beer fans right now, and you find them all over the country.
The haze is part of their charm.
Haze is
That's
part of
what
their
I say.
charm, and people love these things because they taste juicy. They taste like an Orange Julius, and people associate the appearance with the flavors. And what Andy brought up was I'm skeptical that the appearance is required for the flavor.
Well, maybe we should move on to our third course for today. Whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, it's pretty much guaranteed that while the beer is good, the brewpub food is probably terrible. Why the heck is this? I'm hoping you three beer experts can explain this, can unravel this mystery. Lucy Burningham, why is brewpub food so awful?
Well, as a beer writer, it really is kind of an occupational hazard for me. I am out drinking beer, trying lots of beer, and I'm often feeling like, oh no, and I have to eat there. And, I'm not talking about the fact that pubs aren't using like locally sourced duck eggs or nettles and morels in the spring, but more like the fries are soggy and really salty, and the burger is overcooked and the bun is stale. It's just kind of like there's frequently just a lack of basic quality, and it's such a bummer. And, my theory, I'm sure this is pretty obvious, brewers open breweries because they like to make beer, and then all of a sudden they find themselves running a restaurant. It's never really what they wanted to do. They might not know how to do it. They might not have the resources. And then there we are eating, the stale bun. So I'm wondering what you guys think. Why is the bar so low for brewery food?
Not only is the food generally better or worse than it would be in a comparable restaurant, but the menus, come on, the menus haven't changed in 30 years. It's always fish and chips and burgers and sandwiches and nachos. It's like
pizza or flatbread.
Yeah, that's the newest innovation.
Has anyone ever been to a brew pub that has haute cuisine, beautiful small plates, beautifully presented with a dollop of something on top, or is it just really always burgers and fish and chips?
So in my capacity, I'm the national editor for Thrillist, so I do cover Portland, but I also branch out into the rest of the country and rely on writers from throughout every state basically to make these assessments. And one of the assignments that we had a few months ago was the best brewery food in America. We had, I think, 14 things out of 50 states and 3,000 breweries. We were like, we feel confident in recommending this food. And we kind of took out burgers and pizza as the things that we were going to write about, although Pizza Port in San Diego makes fantastic beer and fantastic pizza. You can say the same thing about Double Mountain, which has recently moved from Hood River and set up shop in Woodstock while maintaining their excellent pizza in Hood River. But the fact of the matter is, everybody falls back on those same exact brewery staples. To me, though, and this is the hot take that I'm going to bring. If I'm at a brewery, I don't really care about the food. I'm going to consume about 1,200 calories worth of beer. It doesn't really matter to me if it comes from Cisco or some other mass food conglomerate. If the beer tastes good and I've got a salty snack next to me, I'm generally okay with that.
So, Andy, am I not drinking enough beer? This might be my problem.
That might be the problem.
Okay.
Just drink your dinner.
But at the same time, we're seeing the rise of restaurants, thanks to Cicerones, that are treating beer like wine. And so we're blessed in Oregon to be able to go to a fine dining establishment that has beer pairings. Most of the country doesn't really have that. So if you get into the heartland, they're relying on a mass-produced burger that's going to taste the exact same everywhere. It puts you in this almost time-warpy vortex where every brewery that you go into, you're entering the same exact place. Like you could probably throw a dart and it'll hit one in Duluth.
So, mentioning Cicerones, Lucy, have you done, I'm assuming you've done, as a Cicerone, you've done food and beer pairing. What are some really beautiful food and beer pairings that we all should know about that should be in brew pubs?
Well, cheese. I think there's so much opportunity for breweries and brew pubs to incorporate more fine cheeses and make cheese plates and charcuterie plates and just put a little bit of effort into figuring out good pairings, help people taste different things. They don't even have to cook the cheese, right? I think this could be a sure bet.
Seems pretty straightforward.
One of the most interesting food spreads that I've ever experienced in a brewery was actually in Akron, Ohio, at a place called Hop and Frog. They haven't made their way out to the West Coast at this point. They make a wonderful stout called Boris the Destroyer, which lives up to its name very well.
Good name.
Their entire kitchen was run on hot plates. And so they were doing cheese plates, but they were also doing really minimal pasta plates and really good house-made charcuterie. And that, to me, is a way better brewery food than a really, really crappy burger.
Yes, yes. And I think the breweries, they often try to be ambitious, but in the wrong way. You know, like we'll put a bunch of strange ingredients on this burger and people will think it's haute cuisine. And I think a simple menu that's done well is just way, way better than these, 20 pages of different kinds of nachos.
It's really, you would think it would be really hard to mess up a nacho, but it's actually really, really easy.
Yes, sadly.
We live in one of the best food towns in the country right here, and I'm not letting breweries off the hook here. Beer is the most diverse of all the alcoholic beverages in terms of its flavor palette. You can go all the way from roasty to sour with sweet and everything in between. The qualities that hops give you, yeast gives you, all these things. You could basically pair any food with some kind of beer, and breweries just don't take advantage of that, and it's really irritating. You can walk out of a brew pub, even one that doesn't have necessarily the kind of bad food that Lucy was describing, but just really boring burgers and fries. And there's a cart right there that's serving something from Cambodia or Mexico that's just amazing, some kind of obscure food you haven't had before. And I think why this cart is right here. Why is this food not in that building right there?
So the food truck on the corner is serving better beer or better food than the brew pub is. Yeah,
in my experience, that, and I have to spend a lot of time in breweries, and so I just end up eating a lot of burgers. I'm really tired of burgers. Even a good burger is nice, but
I wonder if part of the problem is people expect a brewery to be a brew pub, whereas with wineries, it's pretty rare for there to be a restaurant in the winery. And that partly has to do with zoning laws because wineries tend to be in agricultural zones and brew pubs tend to be in cities. But maybe, the folks who are running breweries, just all they want to focus on is making beer. I think someone mentioned that earlier.
And breweries should probably think about what food can do in terms of the production. We just had a new brewery open up here in town called Breakside. That's the third place they've opened, and they had this pub that opened up last week or 2 weeks ago. And I asked them how much beer they intended to sell, and they expect to move 3,000 barrels through that pub, which by comparison, nobody knows what that means, but of the 5,000 breweries in the United States, 2/3 will sell less than 1,000 barrels. So if you have
annually.
So if you have good food and a nice pub, you can triple or more your output of a standard small brewery. So there's a reason why food could really help the brewery side, and I don't think people think of it from that perspective.
It's true. If you have food, you're likely to sit there, order another pint, relax, wait for your friends to arrive. If you're hungry, you're out.
But there's a flip side to that coin, too, which is the why can't we have nice things side of it. And we look at a place like BTU Brasserie, or Brasserie?
Yeah, however you want to say it.
I am very un-French. But they were making really quite good Szechuan-style Chinese food while also brewing beer, which doesn't, in the common mind, think, oh, that sounds great together, even though it goes great together. And they didn't do so hot coming out the gates.
Where is BTU Brasserie?
BTU Brasserie is in the area in Portland, on the outskirts of Hollywood, that's typically known as Little Saigon, where there's a huge number of Vietnamese restaurants. It's not commonly known as that, but so many East Asian restaurants open up there, and so this place popped open, a pretty good brewery from my recollection. It's been a little while, and that's part of the problem is that you eat something and you think, oh my gosh, that was great. You can't get the beer outside of it. You kind of forget that it's a brewery. And at the same time, you look at a place that gets an extremely ambitious or ambish-ish menu like Burnside Brewery that was doing haggis and things like that 3 or 4 years ago, and lobster burgers and just crazy chef-driven stuff. Duck fat fries survive, but you still don't see the lobster burger coming up all the time. So I think that there's a huge line between eaters and drinkers that you can't really necessarily hit them both until you take it into a place that's a restaurant that just happens to have a really great tap list.
Well, listeners, we have a challenge for you. Can you please open a brew pub
and invite us
with great beer where we also want to eat and be food snobs? Because
Somewhere near Portland, please.
Somewhere near Portland.
We have beer bars with great food.
We definitely
We
do.
do have
true.
that. Let's go back to the horse
true.
pass, and the OG of the Portland beer bars still has the best fish and chips this side of the pond.
Scotch egg.
It's true, but that's all pretty standard pub fare.
We're at an impasse.
I know. If everybody had to drink in pubs as much as I do and eat as many burgers as I do, they would join me. But I think
Jeff, I'm
maybe
with you.
yeah.
I'm with you. We're united.
Help us out. Help a beer writer out.
All right. Well, on that note, let's move on to our dessert course. And I was thinking about, I guess this isn't really co-branding. It's maybe more like sponsored content. It's a mixtape that you can listen to on SoundCloud if you just Google Hamburger Helper Mixtape. The company is based in Minneapolis, and there's a great hip-hop music community in Minneapolis. So they decided to just give some musicians some money and have them create some good sounds and just somehow integrate the words hamburger helper into their music. And I started listening to it this weekend and I couldn't stop. It's really, really good. Maybe we can even play a clip.
I need a good taste, so I love it. So it sits well in my stomach. A couple bites should be enough. Now I'll go home and whip it up. But first I need some hamburger. I need to quickly soothe my hunger. Alright, now this should be perfect. I'm sure the family would love it. This should help me, no doubt. Now can you point me towards the checkout?
I mean,
Yes.
That's some nice sponsored
Yes.
content right there.
if all sponsored content could be that, the world would be a better place, I think. It's really good. So
I enjoyed that.
I recommend everyone give it a listen. Andy, what do you have for us?
So Netflix just recently launched its new season of Chef's Table, which is a fantastic counter-programming viewing for folks who are weaned on the Anthony Bourdain model of food tourism and kind of looking into the minds of chefs. One episode in particular features a German chef named Tim Rau who came up in Turkish gangs and essentially makes Gordon Ramsay look like a teddy bear. It is absolutely one of the most stark portrayals of restaurant hubris that you can watch on television or a laptop at this point. And it's mind-blowing how much of an asshole this guy looks.
Right. I'm sold.
That sounds entertaining.
Yep.
Thank you. Jeff, how about you?
Well, I always think about beverages, and I usually think about beer, but I was thinking about what was the best thing I've had recently. And it was actually, I had a wonderful cocktail at a little Indian restaurant in town called Maruti, which opened up not so long ago. And they made this amazing cocktail. It had gin, and then they Indianized it. So they used coconut milk somehow and got this kind of emulsion. And they used roses, and it was lavender. It was like this in this flute. It was the most feminine thing I've ever seen. I absolutely loved it. I did not look like I was not having a brewpub experience. I was having the opposite of a brewpub
nice.
experience. And
How was the food?
The food is also very nice.
Burger? Did it live up?
I have lived in India in back in the day, and this is a restaurant that's kind of taking Indian food into America and bringing, it's not just replicating the same kind of Indian food we've always had. And they did that with the cocktail too, and it was really nice. And I'm not usually a gin fan, but when you combine it with some of the other botanicals that you find in Indian food, it worked out beautifully. So I've been thinking about that a lot. I got to get back there and get one of those.
Delicious. And I love coconut milk in a cocktail because it changes the texture as well.
Exactly.
It makes it a multi-sensory experience.
It was perfect, and it also kind of fixes all the ingredients in place so that the liquor doesn't separate, and so the flavors are consistent throughout the whole thing. It was very nice. I was clearly a fan.
Well, thank you. Lucy, how about you?
Well, this might be a sign I've been spending too much time on Instagram. But this week I ran across this Japanese artist named Gaku, and he carves vegetables in this very intricate, ornate way. And I just can't stop thinking about these photos of carved vegetables. I know it sounds strange, but it's like taking, in a salad bar where you have the radish that's a rose, it's like taking that and just, making it into art. And I love the idea of this guy sitting with like an X-Acto knife and a banana and making this beautiful thing. And then somewhere online it says, and then he eats it. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan. Gaku.
Oh, I can't wait to see that, and I will post that on our Twitter and our Facebook feeds for everyone to see. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks to all of our inspirational panelists today. Andy Kryza, who as senior editor at Thrillist gets to write articles like Why Trader Joe's is a Living Hellscape. Andy, you're so right, but the part of me that shops at TJ's every week wishes you were so wrong.
So does the part of me that shops at TJ's every week.
And Lucy Burningham, a certified Cicerone who has written for Sunset, Imbibe, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. I could go on and on. Thank you for being here, Lucy.
Thanks for having me.
And Jeff Alworth, who has a brand new book out as we speak. It's called, Jeff?
The Secrets of Master Brewers. By Story Publishing.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Everyone run out and get that book. Hey, folks, we want you to savor the conversation with us. In order to keep doing this show, we need as many listeners as we can get. So please tell your friends to give us a listen. Please subscribe to The Four Top on iTunes, NPR One, Stitcher, or however you get your podcasts. It only takes a few seconds and it helps us so much. And please, while you are there, leave us a rating. This helps others to find the show. At facebook.com/thefourtop, you can suggest topics for us to discuss after you like our page, of course. And tweet us, please, at #4top, all one word. Today's IACP award-winning show was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in the studios of OPB. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our producer is Alex Ward, and special thanks to OPB sound engineer Hakeem Hasworth. And our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. I hope you can join us for our next episode, and please tell your friends about the Four Top. Auf Wiedersehen!
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Einen Dip.